When the world's largest carnivore decides you're on its menu, you have two choices: fight or run. Gene Mo chose to fight. Kodiak Island lies on the rugged and stunning south coast of Alaska, USA. With its sparkling rivers and frigid bays, the island is renowned for its salmon, which, during the summer months, draw fishermen from all over the globe. However, Kodiak Island is famous for another reason. The northern part of the island is covered in a dense, mountainous forest, and within that forest, you'll find bears. But not just any bears. The Kodiak bear is the largest carnivore on the planet. Slightly larger than the polar bear on average, Kodiak bears are part of the brown bear species found throughout Alaska and North America. But it's their unique diet that gives them their enormous size. That diet? You guessed it, salmon. These massive creatures are fortunate enough to have a high-protein superfood right at their doorstep. This helps them grow to extraordinary sizes. Essentially, they're the bodybuilders of the animal kingdom. During peak season, adult males can weigh up to 1,400 pounds and stand as tall as 9.8 feet on their hind legs. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the weight of a grand piano and about half the height of a giraffe. Definitely not a creature you'd want to tangle with. Yet that's exactly what happened to seasoned hunter Gene Mo on November 1st, 1999. Gene had spent many years hunting in the Kodiak woods and had seen plenty of bears along the way. While he'd encountered some tense situations before, nothing had prepared him for the battle he was about to face with the largest predator on Earth. As he made his way through the forest that day, he noticed deep gouges in the bark of a tree. The markings looked almost as if they had been made by a chainsaw rather than an animal. Gene quickly recognized these as signs of a bear marking its territory and decided to move as far away as he could. But things weren't as simple as that. Gene had spent most of the day tracking a deer, and as he followed the trail, it wound in a large circle. By the time he finally caught up to the deer, he found himself right back in the bear's territory. Unfortunately, he was so focused on the hunt that he didn't realize this was his first major mistake. As the sky darkened, Gene finally took down the deer. Exhausted but satisfied, he leaned his rifle against a log and began skinning the deer beside a stream. This was where he made his second critical mistake. As Gene carefully worked to remove the hide from the deer, the scent of blood and flesh floated through the warm summer air. It didn't take long for that smell to reach the keen senses of a nearby Kodiak bear. The thing about bears is, while they're some of the top hunters in the food chain, they're just as happy to swipe someone else's meal. In an instant, Gene went from being the hunter to being the hunted. One moment, he was bent over the deer, focused on his task. The next, an earth-shaking roar echoed through the woods. The bear's roar was so deafening that it seemed to rattle the very trees around him. Without warning, the bear charged out of the forest, barreling into Gene with the force of a runaway train. He was thrown to the ground, and the bear's claws raked at his throat with terrifying precision. Gene found himself trapped beneath the bear's immense bulk, its fur filling his mouth and eyes, disorienting him completely. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe, and he couldn't scream. It was like being caught in the worst bear hug imaginable. In a stroke of luck, Gene still had his knife in hand. Desperately, he drove it into the thick fur and hide of the bear, but his efforts were in vain. The animal's jaws clamped down on his arm, crushing it with unimaginable pain. Despite the agony, Gene somehow kept his wits about him, continuing to stab and kick at the beast. His heavy mountain boots, likely a lifesaver, allowed him to muster just enough strength to kick the bear off him. As soon as he was free, Gene scrambled to his feet, taking in a deep breath of air. The ability to see and breathe again overwhelmed him, and for a moment, he thought he might not make it out of the bear's deadly grasp. The relief Gene felt didn't last long. His heart sank when he saw his gun still leaning against the log, out of reach. It was too far to grab before the bear would be on him again. If it got him down once more, he wouldn't have the strength to get up. With no time to waste, he abandoned the gun and instead thrust his knife into the bear's neck, aiming for its throat. His body was flooded with adrenaline, every nerve urging him to survive. But the bear's neck muscles were like thick, tangled roots, and the blade only managed to leave a deep gash. Once again, luck was on his side. With the quick reflexes of a prize bullfighter, Gene dodged at the last second, narrowly avoiding the bear's massive body. He saw his opening and drove the knife down as hard as he could, aiming for the vertebrae in its back. The blade sank in. For a brief moment, Gene's heart seemed to stop as the bear roared again. The bear, clearly wounded, backed off and began circling. Gene stood frozen, not daring to move. He knew if the bear charged again, it would likely be the end. Staring into the bear's eyes, Gene knew only one thing could save him now: God. "Lord," he whispered aloud, "please help me, Lord. I need help." Just as he spoke, the bear lunged again. This time, it seemed slower, blood staining its fur as it charged forward. Gene reacted without thinking. He dropped his knife and swung his good arm in a wide arc, landing a powerful punch directly on the bear's nose. His fist collided with such force that he heard a cracking sound and felt his hand break in several places. But the bear staggered back, then collapsed to the ground. Its enormous head came to rest on the moss with a final thud. Gene stood breathless, wondering if the beast was truly dead. Wincing in pain, he limped over to his gun, but his hands were covered in blood and numb from the injury. He couldn't pull the trigger. Fortunately, the bear was already motionless. But Gene's incredible story didn't end there. Gene knew he was losing a lot of blood and urgently needed to get off the island and to a hospital. Once again, he prayed, asking for the strength to make it to the beach where his friend's boat was waiting. And once again, his prayers were answered. The journey was far from easy. Climbing down the mountain was the hardest thing Gene had ever done. 3 times he collapsed into the moss, ready to give up. But each time he prayed for strength and managed to push himself back to his feet. Finally, he reached the shore, where his friend helped him to a nearby cabin. From there, they managed to call for a helicopter. It took Gene a month of rehabilitation, 2 skin grafts, and 500 stitches, but eventually he made a full recovery. In the end, he came out victorious, with the bear's skin later recovered and preserved. To this day, Gene Mo proudly displays the bear's skin on his wall as a reminder of his remarkable survival. As incredible as Gene's story is, there are still many who question whether it really happened the way he tells it. Some dismiss it as a wild tale, one that could only exist in the realm of legends. After all, who could survive such a brutal attack from one of the largest predators on Earth? How could a man, alone in the wilderness, fend off a Kodiak bear with nothing but sheer will and a knife? But Gene's story has been told time and time again, and there are those who stand by it, who believe in the strength of the human spirit and the divine intervention that seemed to guide him through his ordeal. They argue that the evidence, Gene's recovery, the bear's skin still hanging on his wall, speaks for itself. His friends and family swear by the truth of his words, recounting his experience with awe and respect. And yet, there are still skeptics who refuse to accept that a man could survive such a horrific attack without the aid of modern tools or the help of others. They ask questions, pointing out the inconsistencies and small details that seem too extraordinary to be believed. Could a single shot really bring down such a mighty beast? Could a knife truly make the difference between life and death in a struggle with a grizzly? Now, as you hear this story, you too might be questioning what you've just heard. Is it possible that one man could survive such an encounter? Would you believe the story if you were hearing it from someone else? Or would you be skeptical, unsure of whether it's all just a tall tale? You are left to decide. Did Gene truly face down a Kodiak bear and live to tell the tale? Or is this just a story spun out of myth and exaggeration? What do you believe? The answer, as always, is up to you.